Hey everybody, it's James with Trinity River Knives. I know it's been a little while since I posted, but today we're going to go ahead and finish up these quarantine collection knives. These 4 knives I've been working on for a little while. We'll get the handles fitted up and get them sharpened up. Alright, I'm going to start off by just roughly measuring out the material I need. These are slabs of micarta and G10. It's not an exact science. I just need the material to be larger than my handle. Once I got everything marked out, I'll take it to the bandsaw and cut them down to size. And I'm doing a multi-part handle on each of these. I'm trying a couple of different new styles to see how it turns out. On one of the handles, we're going to be doing a Paduke wood handle with a micarta inlay. Alright, then to get the angle on the wood handles that I want, I'm just clamping a 2x4 onto my work rest. Doesn't really matter what angle it is, it just lets me make sure that every one is the same. And this you have to go slow because it will easily overheat your scales and burn it. Alright, so I'm doing a lot of fiddling around with how exactly I want this to work, but here's the gist of what this is going to look like. I've got these two wood pieces I cut in half and then sanded down to an angle, and I've got a piece of black micarta in the middle, and then we're just going to do some white G10 liners between them. So those will be at an angle facing forwards on the side. Alright, so here's where I completely screwed up these handle scales. So I've been working really hard to make them 100% identical, but that's wrong. They actually need to be mirror images of each other. And if you're thinking, surely he didn't glue them up like that, he did. Here's me gluing them up wrong. It ended up being a pretty easy fix. I just had to grind down one side and make that the bottom instead of the top. But it's just a waste of time and material. And I was too busy cussing to film that part, but here they are glued up incorrectly. And we'll move on to the other pieces. Now these I did glue up correctly, so we'll go ahead and watch that. I tend to overkill it on the clamps when I'm doing this, but I don't know. I feel like you can't have too many as long as it's not overpressure. And here's all the scales with the knives that they're going with, glued up and ready to go. Now I've shown this before, but here I'm just drilling through the tang and through the scales all clamped together. This is the best way I've found to make sure that everything's aligned all the way through. I've tried doing it one at a time, and it's almost impossible for me to actually get it right. While I still have them clamped up, I go ahead and just mark where the tang is on the knife so I can cut away some excess material. It just saves a little bit of grinding time later on. I'm cutting down my pin stock. I've got my lanyard tubes for a couple of them. I'm using some 1/8 inch brass stock for some others, and then some mild steel for a couple of those. I'm just kind of using a mix of all 3 of these. And once I have those, I just put them on my drill and run them along the drill press just to reduce the size just a little bit, because right now they're pretty much the exact same size as the hole, which means it won't go anywhere. And now just cutting down some of the excess material. Again, this isn't necessary. You can do this all on the grinder, but I find it's faster and just moves quicker if I just cut away some of the extra. Have them pinned together just to keep them aligned. So now I do a dry fit and I just drill through the liner to get to the scale. This is probably not necessary, but I just like knowing that I have epoxy going all the way from one scale to the other. And I'll go ahead and just flatten these and scuff them up to make sure that the epoxy has something to hold on to. Getting everything nice and cleaned up with lacquer thinner. Now just being careful to make sure that every surface that's going to be contacting each other is completely coated with a little bit of epoxy. You don't need a ton, but just make sure that every single surface is coated. And you also want to make sure you do a really thorough job of cleaning all the squeeze out. It sucks to go and untape a knife after you think it's done and you see a bunch of epoxy. All right, so now we're glued up. I'm going to go ahead and take these pins down on the bandsaw. I love using this bandsaw. It makes things so much quicker. Again, you can do this on the grinder, but you run the risk of overheating. Those pins will get real hot when you're grinding away on them, and then they can actually melt your epoxy and do all kinds of weird stuff. All right, so now I'm just squaring everything up. I want to get everything aligned with the tang of the knife in the profile that I want it to be. So I want to see bare metal all the way down, all the way around on the tang, and squaring up the sides to make sure they're good and flat. And I do this before I do any kind of profiling, any kind of contouring whatsoever. This part is tedious. This is my least favorite part of the handle. Now on this little paring knife, you can see it's almost a square at this point. So I'm going to be doing a lot of thinning down on that, just taking material off of the sides. I think it may actually be thicker than it is wide at this point. All right, here I'm just marking off how much I want to thin out this. I'm just taking my pencil on a flat surface and marking all the way around the tang on both sides. Don't know exactly what it took off. I think it was about 1/8 of an inch on each side, but it just matters that they're identical. Now I'm doing the same thing with this little cleaver, but I want it thicker, so I'm shimming it up on a ruler, just so I'm not taking off quite as much material. So there's our lines that we're going to grind to. Now I'm doing all this on the coarsest belt I have, which is, right now it's 40 grit ceramic, just to hog off the material as quickly as possible. I really don't want to overheat this stuff. both the wood and the micarta will discolor really quickly under heat, and it's really hard to get that out. You then have to grind down everything below that. All right, so now I'm just marking out where I want my taper on the front of this knife. So I want this one to have a nice thick palm swell, and on the paring knife I just want it to taper towards the blade. So I've got that marked. I'm just taking those down to the markings that I've established. And once I have those tapered the way I want to, I'll start knocking off the corners. I usually come in at, I don't know, 30 to 45 degrees, somewhere around there, and just start taking off the corner. I'll take off the corner on one side, then flip to the other side, and then go to the bottom and start working on that. The bottom can be a little bit tricky when it's contoured because you kind of have to go on the edge of the platen. At least the way I do it, which may be the wrong way, but it's worked so far. Make sure you're wearing a mask when working with all this stuff. I know it's kind of a side note PSA, but especially with this handle, which is all G10, that stuff is nasty to inhale. It's fiberglass compressed into resin, so the dust from that is real nasty stuff. Okay, now that I've got the handles roughly shaped out where I want to, I'm going to take a J-Flex belt and just smooth out all the corners that are left over. I would rather do this on a slack belt attachment, but I don't have one yet. We'll get there. And now, if you don't already have any of these J-Flex scalloped belts for handle making, you should really get some. They are awesome for getting these little corners in, because they don't dig into the side like an X-weight or even a J-weight belt does. And with the micarta handles, I'm taking them up to 1500 grit and then putting them on the buffer. With the G10, I took it up to 1000. One thing that was a challenge with this paring knife was that the micarta doesn't sand or grind like the wood does. It's much, much tougher. So keeping them all aligned and together was actually quite a challenge. I'm probably not going to make a handle like this again. This was more of an experiment. I'll go ahead and get these guys sharpened up. So I'm using compressed paper wheels for this. I'll throw a link in the description of the ones that I use. This is the best system that I've found for myself, getting a good consistent edge on there. I struggled with freehand and I could never quite get it right on the grinder, but this is giving me good consistent results. Once I have the bevel established, I'll move over to the smoother side to polish it. And then we'll just finish up on a leather strap. I typically do 10 to 15 passes per side. And I'm happy with that edge. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.